everybody.
Hey Mike, how you doing?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Good, good. Thanks for jumping on this call. Last minute-esque kind of thing. I was going through some of the docs and basically had a whole bunch of feedback, and I'm like, well, it's going to take me an hour to write up all the feedback. I could just do a video call, but then I also thought this would be good to share publicly,
Right.
potentially. But also then potentially have the rest of your team see or whatever. I
Right.
will apologize in advance that it's probably gonna not feel fun because it's a teardown of a doc. And the reality is I know that most of your team never even wrote some, even I wrote some of these things. I'm gonna share my own work. That's totally fine. I just want it to be, I just had a whole bunch of thoughts and I wanted to sort of capture it.
That's great. No, I think for a tech writer, this is quite fun, and hopefully we'll get some good takeaways to
All right.
jump in on.
Good, good. All right, let me share so you can see what I'm looking at. So I'm
Great.
focusing on this just because I know this was recently touched, and of course it's near and dear to my heart.
Right.
I could have picked anything, but I figured I'd start with this. So this is just stream of consciousness kind of stuff here. Oh, and there is a doc for notes. I won't be taking notes, but I would encourage you all to, if you can. I suppose I could pull up the doc just so I can see if you write down something. There we go.
Cool.
All right, so anyway, first overview. It is a vast area. Breaking it up by levels of expertise, I actually thought that was pretty good. It's interesting that we have like 4 levels where most would sort of just either have, you know, new or intermediate or whatever, but new concepts. I think it's a little weird that this one pushes to a marketing page.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I know because we want single source of truth and it's a waste to put things in 2 places, but I feel like, you know, if we need a high level overview, that should be in the docs itself.
Agree. I think one good point there is that we should determine if the marketing page really represents like the slate of concepts we want to convey.
Well, there's that too. It doesn't even cover everything that we really need. So
I think it's a good starting point for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than nothing, but you're probably right that we probably need a better overview here. But also then, going by some of the other articles that you pointed to were like a tutorial as getting started sort of skips all the concepts and just gets you like hands-on and you learn through the hands-on. So I also wonder, like, if I'm really new to it, is that actually where I would start? Or would I just start with the tutorial that where I don't even necessarily, like, maybe you learn some of the concepts as you go, but like you can talk about what CI is about, or you can just show me what CI is about. So, and if they're already here, you know, what are their knowledge coming in? Anyway, interesting questions. I wonder if these 2 really would be able to be collapsed into just a good tutorial. It's interesting too, because that other article talks about how, like, but in a tutorial, you don't talk about concepts. You push that off to somewhere else, maybe with a sidebar, like, oh, if you want to learn more about this, go somewhere else. I do like that there could be some point where somebody should earn, like, what is the difference between CI and CD? And for that matter, there are 2 or more CDs. We don't even define CD until down here. In fact, it's really weird now that I look at this, continual integration, and then it says GitLab CI CD, doesn't define what CD is. It says release CD, that's even weirder. And then here it's talking about CD, well, there it says continuous integration and delivery. That's the first hint of it. But anyway, but there's also delivery and deployment. And so understanding what the difference between those are, I get it, that's some good concepts. It's good to have sidebars for that stuff. I would suggest diving into tutorial as the first thing. Anyway, moving on. So now you're familiar with the concepts. Okay, so now you get the quick start, which is interesting because for a moment I thought that was it. So what is the introduction? Oh, that's just literally lower on the page. Okay. That's a little strange, but okay.
Fair.
Actually, that's really strange now that I look at that, because I'm like, so this is what the content of the page is, but if you wanted something else, here's another place to go to.
Yeah, the more traditional way of handling that is just to have an intro where it's like, if you, in the intro, you just link out to even more basic concepts instead of having it as one of these main sections. So yeah, we can rework that for sure.
Right. I guess the implication here is you're suggesting that this is really where people should start, but A, if you need a primer before then go here. And then if you already know, then jump ahead.
It's a good concept of sort of leveling, right? Like the prerequisite knowledge versus the
yeah.
But we can handle it a little better, I think.
All right, cool. So now this diagram, this one I can cut up because I wrote it. I didn't actually make the drawings. Somebody in design did, but
right.
I sketched it first. This stuff on the left, this code, related code, I think is probably just confusing to people. And actually, I think it's confusing even to the tech writers because they're now trying to explain why this is there. And it's not for the reason you think. When I had code and related code in that diagram, it's because I was thinking of multi-project pipelines and how you could have one project go through its entire pipeline and then kick off another project, and that's the related code part. People seem to have interpreted that as like, oh, but I've got a gem that I include, and because it's referenced through there, that's somehow related code. That's not what it was meant. I would suggest at this point, especially in an introduction, don't talk about multi-project pipelines. That's just not worth it. So rip out that part. Some other things that jump to mind. Well, it's interesting now. This test thing out there is interesting because we used to have a test stage. And so that's literally why that was the icon for the test stage. We don't have a test stage anymore. So there's no value in sort of relinking to that. Actually, all of these used to be stages. Review, staging, and production were stages in our 10-step I2P thing before we went to the DevOps lifecycle. So this whole, can you see my cursor, by the way, when I move my mouse around? Okay, good. So this test thing is no longer relevant at all. These things are okay, but this adds no value. It's a tie back to an old thing. Anyway, now when I'm looking through here, this comment about assuming the builds are successful, a CD pipeline is triggered. That is factually incorrect. There's no additional pipeline. There's just one pipeline. The CD jobs are triggered. I wrote this, again, just as a conceptual of within a pipeline, there's, well, actually, I think this came from a document where I say there's actually 3 types of pipelines. There's the multi-project pipeline, and then there's a CI pipeline and a CD pipeline. Depending on what tool you come from, if you're a CI tool, you think about the CI pipeline. If you're a CD tool, you think about the CD pipeline. We do all of it in one pipeline. So even my box around there calling it CI pipeline, that was a conceptual explanation, but it probably, I don't know if it confuses people or not. It may not be one of those important confusions. But just technically, we don't trigger another pipeline. We just trigger more jobs. It's in one pipeline. Again, I don't know if that's actually causing people confusion, but
well, I mean, if you think it could be confusing, I'm sure a lot of other folks would think the same. So,
well, I would go the other direction and say, I'm not sure this whole thing is helpful.
Yeah.
It's out of context at this point. If somebody doesn't know what a CI pipeline looks like or a CD pipeline, this could just be redrawn and relabeled, but like having build, unit test, integration test, review, staging, and production totally makes this is a pipeline. It's just the boxes around it aren't. So there's probably just some better graphical representation that would explain to people, oh, what actually happens here. Right. Now, if you want to go further, there's I hate to do this, but GitHub has a what was it called? It's, I don't know, I think it's GitHub Flow. Yeah, it's in their guide. They have this kind of a diagram to show the GitHub flow, but this is our CI/CD pipeline. And this actually helps convey things a little bit better. It's like, okay, there's a branch, and then there's some CI/CD, and then you merge it back. That also gets back to the whole point of continuous integration is to be merged back. Because technically, CI/CD works on master and on a branch, right? But a CI flow looks like this. I think this conveys it better, frankly. Anyway, so this out of context for different purposes, repurposed, great, because we didn't have it, but this has been in there for 2 or 3 years now, and it's not helpful. Okay, cool. Moving on. Yeah, I mean, we talk about review apps, which is great to introduce it, but it's like we don't even describe it, so you got to click through to see what that means. It might be one of those things I'm debating now mentally, even before I say this, of Do we talk about review ops at this point? Because it's complicated. Do we start with, I go, here's the simple CI. So you understand what CI means. And then, oh, by the way, here's complicated. And review apps are somewhere in between. They're a best practice that we actually encourage. Auto DevOps has review apps built in, and there's far more things that are, there are things far more complicated than auto DevOps. But at the same time, it might be too much for somebody to process at the moment. I don't know, maybe because we're talking about CD, it's okay, because review, staging, and production, those totally make sense. I'll back off. I think review ops should be there, but then maybe you need to describe what those things mean early on. Because if this is the intro, you're now making me actually click through to understand what's in the intro. You should have it be self-contained. All right, essentials. Getting started, which presumably is the same guide in Quickstart README, or is it not? No, it is. This is the same guide. It's weird because it's called two different things. It's called Quickstart and Getting Started. It should be obvious to me that they're the same things. And then it's also interesting, like, okay, if that's the essential, what's on the rest of the page? That's actually really weird now that I think about it. If it's essential, it should just be on this page or something else. I don't know why we jumped to Auto DevOps next and basic usage. I'm actually just confused now how this is essential. Am I supposed to go off and read those things and then come back when I'm done with the essentials and then go on further? I genuinely don't know. Intro to pipelines and jobs, I will actually go off to, because I did take a look at this the other day. And this is an interesting one too, because this is that same old diagram, but in the even older version. And then this is an old diagram I wrote. And then I feel like there was one more, but maybe it's not. Anyway, this is an introduction to pipelines. And it used to probably literally have this one paragraph and type. Maybe it had two paragraphs, maybe three actually, because it even had the developer workflows. And then it described jobs. And then now it gets into seeing the failure for reason for jobs. It's like, okay, that's beyond intro, but okay. Pipeline graphs, maybe that's intro again. Manual actions, that's way beyond. Delaying, that's beyond. How pipeline duration is calculated. Up until this point, literally nowhere have we even shown a pipeline duration. We have not talked about a pipeline duration. So why are we talking about how it's calculated? Clearly I know why. It's because we didn't have anywhere else to put this content and we just slapped it somewhere. But this is not an intro to pipelines anymore, which maybe is okay because the URL is just pipelines. Maybe this is everything about pipelines, but the title of the page is intro to pipelines. If this were just the first section were intro to pipelines and then we went on to the details of pipelines, maybe it'd be okay. But when we get into like how pipeline duration is calculated, it's just not intro anymore. Security on protected branches, oh my God, that is not intro. That is a topic all on its own. And I'm also gonna say, I'm reminded of, I miss Heroku Dev Center. I don't know if it's the best way to organize dev docs, but we didn't have a hierarchy. It was just docs all independently of which you could link between them. And something like this would just be a topic of which, again, you might link to it, but it's a topic. And you know, this how pipeline duration is calculated would just be a topic. So I imagine it that way, but then when I imagine it now in the hierarchy, I don't know, then you got to start thinking about like, okay, do we make a details page that then just links off to a bunch of topics in the details? I don't know, maybe. But I just can't help but think that these should be linked from somewhere. And like maybe at the bottom of my intro, it says like, oh, here's some other topics to consider. And it tells me the titles. And if I want to find out how pipelines are calculated, go ahead, I'll click through. And then frankly, I can link to it from several different places. But right now, this is just absolutely not an intro.
Mike, do we have like a rule on how many levels deep we want our information architecture for our docs?
I don't think we have a hard rule, but I think what you're seeing here is the tendency to add a lot to one page because historically, you know, I think there was both an aversion to having too many markdown files, but also wanting folks to be able to just, you know, Control F and find what they need. I think it's a little bit, it's worth rethinking. I mean, to Mark's point, there is some beauty in picking and looking at a smaller set of information and deciding to choose which advanced page you want to go to next, because it's overwhelming in many cases. But
so For historical context, I think actually one of the reasons that we just add to pages is that developers typically, but even PMs who add content don't want to create pages. They want to add to pages. It's the barrier, the threshold is so much lower to just add to a page. And so if, the person who was involved with this says, I want to just go add something, I'll just find the most appropriate place to add it. Right. I think that's actually one of the nice things that the Heroku Dev Center did for us is like, it's trivial just to add a page and then not have to worry about hierarchy and organization and browsing. And like, oh, well, if we put it under this thing, then it's only going to get found if people actually traverse through. And then if you put it there, you actually have to manually update the table of contents in the other page to point to it. And so that's actually 2 pages need to edit, right. Blah, blah, blah. It's so much easier if we can just sort of like, oh, say this one's related to that one. And in the Dev Center, they would just automatically put some cross-link and move on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still valuable to have that hierarchy of concepts. And so I think, obviously we're coming at this at what's there now and what's wrong with it, but we also need to step back and just do an analysis. Like, what are the concepts? What structure should they have? Because, I mean, you can see many of them in the left nav here. Again, not perfect, but, for example, pipelines. Like, if we just, if we look at our folder structure and rework it a bit, it'll be a little bit, it's a more of a trivial question of like, does everything get lumped in the same page or do we break it out multiple pages? As long as the hierarchy is correct for those like buckets.
Right, like if I were to look at pipeline durations, I would click on pipelines and somewhere from there I should be able to find it. And so again, maybe it becomes then, oh, here's the intro, and then, oh, you want other topics. And then I personally would advocate for an extra layer deep of hierarchy at least, if not, multiple.
Yeah, that's where I was going with it. I think that makes sense because you could have pipelines as like intro page, which has those first 3 topics as Mark was mentioning, and then underneath pipelines have the rest of the sections.
Right, because like, originally it was just like a definition of pipelines and a definition of jobs. And then maybe we added these development workflows, again, just repurposing some content I had somewhere else. Some of these things, I don't even know if they, again, my nomenclature, I called it a CI pipeline, a deploy pipeline, and a project pipeline. Here's where I talked about the cross-project stuff. Because again, I think literally I wrote these words 2.5 years ago. But I don't know, this is the right place to be talking about types of pipelines, maybe, but even the nomenclature is probably just wrong because there's really just one kind of pipeline. So it's really, I don't know, so maybe I used the wrong word there.
Yeah, maybe like uses of pipelines.
Yeah. Development workflows is also an interesting one too, but this was also from some issue that I just wanted to wrap my brain around. Like, okay, does this proposal for this particular feature work for these 3 flows? But the reality is there's far more flows than this. And I feel like actually there should be like a lot written on this. In fact, it's been on my list for a long time to talk about like, what are some of the common ways that people work? If you want to do, and actually subdividing this first, like, you want to do a Git-based flow where I tag something and then it gets released to production. Great, here's how that would work. Oh, you want to do a manual promote to production. Great, well, here's how that would work. It's almost the same pipeline, frankly, but here, I mean, I just sort of glommed it in there and said, oh, tag for release or manual trigger, but I didn't tell you how. But these are very different flows for people. Like one is Git ops and the other is manual ops. And then the other is actually like automatic CD, continuous deployment. And like, those are the things I think I'd like to see, like continuous deployment, manual deployment, Git-based deployment. I think we absolutely need to expand on that because then people will be like, oh yeah, that's the one that's closest to me. Great, how do I do that? And then like, oh, here's a GitLab CI YAML that shows me how to do that. Great, now I actually know how to get started. So like this is like the kernel of something interesting. It just never was built on. All right, so anyway, rolling back. So now here, it's interesting because now in one of the essentials, we're pointing to like the mother of all reference docs. Like this is the massive doc with all the whatever. I mean, yes, this is essential. Is this the time to be introducing it? I don't know. It is reference. Like that is clearly, you're at a different place when you need that reference. So this is weird because like, I don't know, am I supposed to click through these or am I just supposed to know that these exist so that if and when I need that, then I click through? I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not,
And
it's
then
not the approach I like to take, because typically it should be just mentioned, the YAML is an essential part of the process. Here's where you read
right,
more about it. But you should really be getting through an introduction to all those basics
right.
first before enticing people to dive in.
And then what's interesting here is that in this thing, I don't like, oh, the YAML is configuration. Huh, interesting. I did not. I was looking at this and saying, why isn't the YAML in this top level doc? Because if I want to understand how, or the GitLab CI YAML, like I would expect the title to be GitLab CI YAML or YAML, not configuration. Because there's also in project configuration, there's auto DevOps configuration, there's several UI configuration options now. So that's not even, I mean, maybe at one time that was the only main configuration. Actually, there was always some configuration, but.
Were you linking from, where's the word configuration? Are you talking about the left nav or within?
So sorry, in the left nav.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And this goes, I mean, that
What
goes
I was going to say is like,
Go ahead.
if it said here, like, oh, GitLab CI YAML reference or something like that, like if that was in this list, and first off, not at the top of the list, because that's kind of ridiculous, but if it was at the bottom and it was like, oh, great, like then don't put me in this essentials because it's too early. But oh, if I really want the GitLab CI YAML reference, there it is. And then ever in context, if it's ever like, oh, use this keyword and like you link off to the reference from the keyword, like I don't know that I would ever want to have this in the essentials. Because again, essentials to me implies like this is minimum required knowledge. No, like this is not minimum required knowledge. Like there are so many advanced things in there. You need to have some minimal understanding of it, but this is not the page to get that minimal understanding. You start there to try to understand it, you are overwhelmed.
Right.
Start somewhere else. So that feels wrong. Different direction altogether. This GitLab CI CD for external repositories. I mean, this is great if you want to use CI. Oh, it's actually a pretty short page. If you want to use CI with GitHub or Bitbucket or something else, that's great. I don't know why that's an essential. I don't even know. Like, I don't need to know that because I am using GitLab.com, for example. Isn't that like just off a side? I don't know. Like that feels like a side topic at best. Maybe something that shouldn't even be introduced here, except that maybe at some point you need to say, look, go GitLab CI CD is integrated directly into GitLab, but also works with something else. And then it's a link off. Like, so if somebody lands on this page to learn about CI, because I think this used to be in the docs, like this was like you could pick Omnibus or you could pick GitLab. You could also pick CI, like that was a top level choice at one point. It's not anymore, but people would land here as their first introduction to docs. And then they might be confused because they don't know if it works with GitHub. Fine, I can see mentioning that. But even then, like we're sort of also burying it. Like the point is, yes, it works with GitLab. GitLab works with, GitLab CI works with GitHub. We don't say it. We say for external repositories. What the hell does that mean?
Right. No, I mean, agreed. One of the points of having an introductory page is you can see everything that you can do at a high level. You can read through and know that. So, I mean, I couldn't agree more.
Maybe. I mean, that's the interesting question is how much do I like, is that part of the intro? Is it an overview or have you just given me like, if I've got 20 things I can know about, do I need to have an overview of 20 things or do you give me the intro to 5 things I need to know about? And then,
that sounds to me like a key concept, the fact that you could use GitLab CI with other repositories, but we're not really offering that.
Well, part of the problem is that it totally depends on if you need it or not. If I don't need it, then it's an irrelevant concept. If I need it, it's an essential concept. Maybe you don't know, so therefore you got to put it there. Maybe.
Right.
GitLab Runner, this is an interesting one. If this is essential, why isn't it just in essential? Because here it says, note it's useful. It's like, why is this not parallel? Why is this one of these things not like the other? Anyway, then we jump into auto DevOps, which is really weird. I don't know. I guess it's a sub under essentials, which is even weirder then. So like, why isn't it again just part of the topic? Like, why isn't this just here's a list of topics? There are 3 different ways now to describe essential topics. One of them gets its own section. One of them gets a note. 4 of them get things in the table. I genuinely don't understand why each one gets which. I do somewhat like talking about DevOps, but then here's another pointed perspective too. This talks about it being an alternative. From a new user perspective or a new instance perspective, by default, auto DevOps is turned on And that is CI/CD. Now that used to not be the case, right? And I'm sure this was written when that wasn't the case, but it is the case now. So is that an alternative to CI/CD, or is that in fact the default CI/CD, and an alternative to auto DevOps is to add your own GitLab CI YAML? And I know that's a little bit of a tricky question. Frankly, it's a bit of a product question of what we want to be true. But technically speaking today, I think there's a reasonable case to say that auto DevOps is in fact on by default.
Right.
Although maybe it's not on for .com for everything. I think it's still at 20%. So some random portion of people are getting auto DevOps by default. But at a self-managed instance, it's on by default, and some portion of .com get it by default.
Right.
It's anyway. It's so either you think it is important, and we should then talk about it, and then I would argue that in fact that is the intro. And you start with, hey, look, when you use GitLab CI or when you use GitLab, you push this file and we will run auto DevOps, and here's what it is. Oh, that's not working for you? Great. Here's how you break out and do it yourself. Like that feels like a logical flow. Mentioning auto DevOps and passing feels weird. If anything, I would mention it somewhere in between the basic and advanced, right? Because if we expect people to just start with, okay, I want to use GitLab CI YAML, then let's start with, I'm going to use GitLab CI YAML. So it's like, again, I've had to scroll down 5 pages worth before I can get into, okay, great, now how do I actually use GitLab CI YAML? Now, interestingly, you're diving into more knowledge again. You're diving right into variables, where variables can be used. We really want to talk about variables. User and job permissions. Okay, configuring GitLab runner. This is random. Are these the basic knowledge I need to know? Like, I would think the basic knowledge is, how do I make a job? How do I change the stages of a job? How do I, do before script, after script, and things like that? Like, again, probably the right thing is to go through tutorial, but the basic knowledge is like some of these, like these are the core building blocks, and then introduction, and then, well, actually, we've talked about advanced is now getting into environments, which is interesting because we're already implying that CI is basic and CD is advanced. I'd love to shift that at some point, but you still might be right that most people do start with CI and then they move to CD. But I don't know if I'd want to call it advanced, but I do understand that getting started, you start with CI, and then you move to CD, and then you move to monitoring, and then you move to other things.
What's actually interesting about that basic section is like the sentence underneath the basic heading. It almost assumes.
Oh, it's weird. It says with basic knowledge.
Yeah.
It extends your knowledge. But it's totally mislabeled, whatever. I agree. The sentence makes sense, but then this is no longer basic usage. Right. We've missed the basic usage. Is what we maybe thought that the basic usage was up there. Those were the essentials. So if you read through the entire YAML thing, now you've got the basics. Great. Now we're going to tell you about variables.
Yeah, and it should just be like those two tables almost maybe should be merged together in terms of like other functionality. But then, and this is actually something that's important too, like making sure that that table is exhaustive of all other functionality.
Well, but I would argue as a new user, I want to actually see that decoupled. I still like the idea of tell me what I essentially need to know. It's just
I'm not talking about essentials. I'm talking about the basic usage table there. That one and the.
But you said the two tables merge. Which ones were you referring to? Basic and
those two. Scroll down just a little bit. Those two right there.
I see. Yes. Okay, got it. So let me just finish that then. So I think I believe we should have an essentials or basic usage or whatever the hell you want to call it, but something that says, here's how you get started. Here are the topics you need to know about. Then down below, these are just topics. Basic or advanced, that's sort of irrelevant. Like variables may be basic. They also may be really advanced. It's up to you. Permissions could be advanced. I don't know. These are just topics. So if you want to then get into like, okay, we have an intro to CI/CD. And now we've got, hey, here's some topics you want to read about. And then in the topics, going back to our new dichotomy here, and we said we've got guides for these things, not just reference, but like, oh, you want to learn how to do variables. Great, here's how you do variables. You want to learn how to do XYZ, here's how you do it. I'd love it to be more guide-based. Then again, this is all reference-based. Like variables, if I click through, it's a list of predefined variables, which is huge. It talks about defined variables. Still nowhere that really, well, I guess, yeah, this is where you get to define your own variables. And then there's also variables in the UI, which is now actually confusing because we just call them variables. Anyway, but still, it doesn't really say like how I make use of variables. You got to sort of like dig in. So it's not an intro to variables.
There should be at least an intro here, even if it's like rather reference oriented. The concept should be in the intro at the very least.
Right. I mean, that's a good point. We just talk about the priority, which happens to then be like, oh, here's all the ways I can set variables, which frankly, there's a lot. But like, why would I even want variables? Why, whatever. Anyway, so I like the idea of having guides from here and just topics. And then, yeah, some of these topics are pretty advanced. Cache dependencies, submodules, totally makes sense. Pipelines for merge requests is probably not an advanced topic anymore, though. That's just like, for a lot of people, that's just a choice. Do you want to have a pipeline on your branch activity or on a merge request? It's probably not really advanced at all. Schedules may be kind of similar. Deploy boards hopefully aren't really advanced. It's just that you need to be doing CD. So maybe if you want to break out, again, CI into CD, that's fine. If you want to have a section on CD, I'd like to not see CD lumped under advanced, I guess is what it comes down to. Chat ops, I'm fine with that being that. And then this thrown in GitLab pages, sort of this wild card. I mean, I know why it's there. Oh, it's literally under advanced usage, which is interesting because in some ways it's the least advanced. It's just like, oh, I copy this template and I've got a pages. Like that's actually an intro way. It's not advanced at all. It's just another use case. Then we finally jump into examples. Oh, we don't actually jump into them, but we point to them. And this is tough because I think at one point these examples were meant to be actually like starter points for people doing CI/CD. I don't think that we really recommend you do that anymore. I don't know if anybody does. I'd love to actually have some data on that because I feel like if people were actually going to do a PHP app first time, they'd probably just Google it and find somebody else. But we also have a PHP template, I believe. And so shouldn't I start from there? Like, why would I start from this thing? And why is there a difference between what the GitLab CI YAML does? And one of the reasons is because we use Auto DevOps for PHP. But in this case, we're not using Auto DevOps. Anyway, but it does explain some stuff. But I would rather see this probably just be a tutorial. Like, okay, pick your language. Or even just pick one language, pick some like JavaScript. Everybody can do JavaScript or whatever. I don't know, it's not true, but run through a tutorial or run through multiple tutorials. Heroku used to do that. Like for these 5 languages, here's the tutorial to get started. And we run through the hello world for each kind of tutorial. Anyway, I realize I'm going over, so I should wrap this up.
I also have a long-standing delivery that's ringing my bell right now.
All right. Well, anyway, this has been enough. Thanks for your time. Hope this has been helpful.
No, I mean, super helpful. I mean, if you have a couple of more seconds, I would just say that I think looking at the current docs is essential, but I also think taking that high-level view of like the current state of the docs today, how would you structure the capabilities, the key concepts? And we need to do that at the same time and then kind of mesh those things together. So I think we're taking the right steps here. I think it's important to question everything that's there. So yeah, I'll update the issues. I'll show this to Evan, and we'll take it from there next week, I guess.
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.